Many of today's geopolitical tensions, from the standoffs in Eastern Europe to the debates over international law, trace back to specific moments of friction. Often, that friction happens to coincide with a single date on the calendar. July 17th has repeatedly served as a focal point for the events that define our current reality. When we examine this day through the lens of history, a cycle appears, one of collapsed regimes, newly drawn borders, and the creation of international rules. Viewing the events of July 17th chronologically reveals how the collapse of the old world order directly necessitated the systems we use to manage global conflict today. On July 17, 1918, Bolshevik forces executed Tsar Nicholas II and his family in a basement in Yekaterinburg. This act ended 3 centuries of Romanov rule and cleared the way for the rise of the Soviet Union. Exactly 18 years later, on July 17, 1936, a military uprising in Morocco signaled the start of the Spanish Civil War. The conflict became a violent testing ground where the 20th century's competing ideologies, communism, fascism, and democracy, first clashed on a grand scale. These 2 events dismantled the imperial structures of the past, leaving a vacuum that global powers would spend the next several decades trying to fill. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was over, but the future of the continent remained undecided. On July 17th, Winston Churchill, Harry Truman, and Joseph Stalin met at the Potsdam Conference to begin the difficult work of organizing the post-war world. Their primary focus was Germany. They partitioned the defeated nation into 4 occupation zones, controlled by the Soviets, the Americans, the British, and the French. By defining these specific borders on July 17th, the Allies effectively drew the front lines of the Cold War, establishing a geopolitical divide that would last for nearly half a century. Decades after the world was partitioned at Potsdam, the international community began searching for ways to bridge the gap between East and West. On July 17, 1975, the Apollo-Soyuz test project achieved the first orbital link-up between American and Soviet spacecraft, a rare moment of cooperation during the Cold War. This symbolic gesture in space eventually gave way to a more permanent legal effort on Earth. On July 17, 1998, diplomats in The Hague adopted the Rome Statute, the treaty that established the Permanent International Criminal Court to prosecute war crimes and genocide. Both milestones represent a recurring drive to replace the chaos of the early 20th century with a framework of cooperation and universal law. However, those laws and borders are still being tested by ongoing regional conflicts. On July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine. The disaster was a direct consequence of the territorial and ideological friction between Russia and the West. The subsequent legal proceedings forced the international community to lean on the very systems of accountability created in The Hague 16 years earlier. In this way, July 17, 2014, serves as a collision point where the borders of 1945 and the international laws of 1998 met in a moment of modern violence. History functions as an ongoing chain reaction. This diagram shows the cycle we see on July 17th. Old regimes fall, victors draw new maps, the world establishes rules to prevent further chaos, and then new conflicts emerge to test those rules. When we see international courts issuing modern warrants or witness new disputes over decades-old borders, we are seeing the direct results of these historical turning points. The events of July 17th are not just entries in a history book. They provide the structural framework for the world we inhabit today.